So for the rest of the modules in this object-oriented design concept, what we're going to do is we're going to build an example program, and then I'll upload it so you can actually play with it and deal with it. What we're going to do is we're going to build a basic program that manages a high scoreboard. Now I'm not going to fully complete it because I know that a lot of you plan on using a high scoreboard in your final projects, and I don't want to be doing the work for you. That's your job. So we are going to build the basic outline for it though. So this should give you a good head start in any case. So what I have here is our basic main program. I've just created a program called Object Demo, and this is not a game project. It's just a generic project, but you could do the exact same stuff inside of your game projects. There's no difference whatsoever. The only variation you may have is you may have to import a lot of the different aspects to it. So for example, my particle system demo here, we're going to go through this in a future lesson, but if I go to my emitter class, what you can see is there's a whole bunch of imports. All this stuff here, all I did was in the main of the game, I just grabbed all of this. I just copied it, and then I went into my new class and I pasted it at the very top above the class line. Okay, you do that and you shouldn't have any issues. Now in our main programs, we're probably not going to need a lot of that stuff, so we don't need to do any of that importing. We just handle our business, whatever we need to do. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to get rid of this auto-generated stub. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a system that is going to be made up of 3 classes. The main class, which you always have in your programs, but it's also going to have 2 other classes. We're going to have a scoreboard class, and we're going to have a high score class. So what I mean by that is, just going up here, where's my mouse? There it is. And just to illustrate this is typically what we're going to draw. We have our main class. Our main class right there. And that main class is going to be made up of a scoreboard class. It's going to have 1 scoreboard class. I don't know why it doesn't autocorrect those lines. So it has a scoreboard class, and the scoreboard class is going to be made up of a whole bunch of high scores. So these are basically what we call class diagrams, and every class diagram is made up of 3 different components. It's made up of a title, a set of data. Data goes in here. Wow. Data goes in here, and then functionality goes in here. Pardon my handwriting, as usual. So I'm not going to go into the details of main right now because main is pretty basic and pretty straightforward. But scoreboard is going to be made up of certain data. Mainly it's going to be made up of a number of scores. So we might say something like this. Int max scores. I wonder if I can just write in this directly so you guys aren't dealing with my handwriting. Let's just take this away and let me just type it. Nope. There we go. That's better. Let's say max scores. And it's also going to have, that should be lowercase I, and it's also going to have an array. And it's going to have an array of scores, of high scores. I don't know how many yet, but it's going to be something related to max scores. So we're going to say high score. We're going to have an array of high scores. We're just going to call this scores. All right. So that sets up my data. Let me just draw another line here. And the line is going to come across like that. And down here is all the different behaviors or all the different functionality I'm going to have for scoreboard. I'm going to leave that blank for right now because we're going to come back to that. There's actually going to be a lot more there than I made space for. High score is the most basic version that we're going to deal with here. And high score is going to be made up of 2 simple pieces of information. A score and a name. So we have an int score, and we're going to have a string name. And that's it. It will have, I am going to draw in one piece of functionality, and it's going to have basically, where is it? Get rid of that. We're going to create one function here that's going to be called get output string. So we're going to say string get output string. Now, what is that going to return? It's going to return something along the line of like the name and then ... and then the score. Something that's nicely, cleanly formatted. We'll get to that later, but that's not really the point. So basically what we have here is we now have a class diagram, a very basic class diagram, but we have a class diagram nonetheless. And this class diagram has different flows. And we can draw this, and we can say that the main is made up of one scoreboard, and the scoreboard is made up of anywhere from 1 to star high scores. Because maybe it's a top 5 high scoreboard, maybe it's a top 10 high scoreboard. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But we can customize that using the max scores variable. So this is basically what we're looking at. So we're going to create each one of these classes and then flesh them out. So we're going to start off with the most basic version first, which is high score, because that's very simple. Just a score, a name, and then a very simple function. So I'm going to go over to Eclipse here, and I need to create a new class. And this is the process to create a new class. We're going to right click on our source folder, and we're going to say new class. I don't want to select any of these boxes. All I want to do is give it a name. In my case, I'm going to call it high score. And I'm going to click finish. That's it. Now, as long as you have all your formatting options set up, there shouldn't be an issue. So everything should work just fine there. So now that I have this, I need to decide, well, looking at my class diagram, I need, well, what data do I need? I need 2 variables. I need int score and string name. Okay. Int score. And we'll give it a starting value of 0. And string name, we'll give it a starting name of, let's say, John Doe. Now, of course, that'll be modified, but we'll get to that in a bit. So we have this very basic data. The next thing we look at is we need to see the fact that, oh, we need to create that get output string. We're not going to go to that yet, though. I'm going to pause on that just for a second, because I need to talk about one quick topic. Is something called scope. Now, what scope means is, we've talked about this a little bit before, but really it's the idea of these keywords here, these what are called access modifiers. What has access to whatever it's talking about? In this case, what has access to the high score class? So there are, well, in our case, what we're going to talk about, there's 2 main access modifiers we're going to deal with right now. Public, which means anything that has an instance of this class has access to it. So we are going to create an instance of the high score class inside of scoreboard, which means scoreboard will have access to the high score. We are not going to create an instance of high score in main, though, which means main won't be able to use any of the functionality that's in high score. It doesn't even know that it exists. So we have to decide who we want access to it. So public means anybody that has an instance of this class. Remember, we're creating the blueprint here. Anybody that has the instance of this class can access any of its public data or behaviors. In this case, I'm going to make score private. Private means nothing outside of this class, even if it has an instance of this class, can access it. Doesn't even know that it exists. So these are both going to be private. I'm not going to let anybody even look at them. Okay? And then next, we can have public things, but we're not going to get to that just yet. But if I created a variable, I might have a public variable, let's say public string output value. Now that could be a variable that I could actually modify and give access to external classes for that. But we're not going to get into that just yet. So we know how to create a basic class. Now every class is going to be made up of 3 main, well, really 4 main components. First, we have our data. The next piece we're going to have is what we call our constructor, which I'll get to in a second. Following that, well, let's number these things, because that's what our videos are going to be covering. And then following our constructor, we have our, well, what we're going to call them getters and setters, just to keep it simple for now. Getters and setters, really they're accessors. They're getting and retrieving data. And then finally, we have our functionality. Now, in our functionality, I'll just write this out right now. We know we want to create a function that says get output string, and it's going to return a string. Now, because I want external classes to have access to this, I have to make it public. So I'm going to call this public string. It's going to return a string. Get output string. Has no parameters. It's just going to return a nicely formatted version of score and name. So we're just going to say return name plus dot 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 commas dot and plus score. And that's it. That's all get output string is going to do. But it's going to be nice and neat. So it might be like Bob dot 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 452. So that is our basics of how to create a class and how to create the data for that class. We also talked about scope, private and public. Private means only inside this class can use it. Public means anything outside of this class that has an instance of high score can use it. Okay, we'll get into actually modifying that shortly.